Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we're diving deep into a fascinating and honestly a highly contrarian thesis from Heresy Financial. Right now, there's this dominant narrative driving our entire financial system, a story that pretty much everybody seems to believe. But the source material we're looking at today, it challenges absolutely everything the market currently assumes about the economy and where our money is actually headed.
So you really have to ask yourself, is the market just completely wrong about interest rates? I mean, if you watch any mainstream financial news right now, it feels like this universally accepted, undeniable fact that the Federal Reserve is gearing up to keep rates incredibly high for the long haul, or maybe even deliver another aggressive rate hike just to finally crush inflation. But what if that widespread consensus is actually totally backward?
And that stark divide is exactly what we're unpacking today. Take a look at this comparison. On one side, you've got the market consensus. Everyday investors, mainstream analysts, all bracing for this higher-for-longer reality and another potential Fed hike. But then, look over on the other side. This represents the underlying reality according to Heresy Financial's analysis, and the data here points toward an inevitable and potentially very imminent rate drop. Now, we aren't here to take sides or endorse a specific financial strategy, but our goal today is to impartially break down exactly how this source arrives at such a radically different conclusion from the rest of Wall Street.
Section 1. Hidden pressures forcing the Fed's hand.
Okay, so to understand why interest rates might literally be forced lower, we have to look past the superficial headline numbers and actually dig into the underlying macroeconomic data. And the absolutely crucial point is this: the private credit crisis is worsening. When interest rates stay elevated for prolonged periods of time, it doesn't just make your mortgage more expensive. It quietly and dangerously creates a severe, escalating crisis within the private credit sector. Countless companies that rely on this sort of shadow banking system to survive are suddenly hitting these massive refinancing walls. They're having to roll over their old debt at new, exorbitantly high rates that they simply cannot afford. It's essentially a ticking time bomb.
Just get a load of this staggering number, $159 billion. Now, you might assume big tech is totally immune to high interest rates, right? I mean, they're famous for sitting on massive mountains of cash. But the source material highlights this unprecedented borrowing binge happening right under our noses. A jaw-dropping $159 billion in debt has been accumulated by these tech giants alone. When even the absolute titans of industry are carrying that kind of massive leverage, the pressure on the broader financial system to lower the cost of capital becomes, well, absolutely immense.
Let's connect the dots here. We've got three escalating pressure points building up side by side: private credit strain, big tech debt, and then the ultimate elephant in the room, government borrowing needs. The U.S. government is running massive deficits right now and attempting to manage that skyrocketing sovereign debt at a 5% interest rate. It's completely fiscally toxic. These three pillars represent the real economy collectively begging for relief. Together, they're forcing a pivot. They're creating an environment where the Fed essentially has no choice but to lower rates just to keep the whole system afloat.
Section 2. The catalysts. Cover to cut.
Now, it's one thing for the Federal Reserve to be secretly forced to cut rates because of all this systemic debt, but they can't just do it out of nowhere. They need a public excuse, right? They need cover so they don't look like they're surrendering to inflation or panicking about a market crash. So let's dive into this new playbook. The source outlines three specific, imminent catalysts that provide this exact cover. First, falling oil prices. This naturally pulls down headline inflation numbers, making things look much better on paper. Second, evolving inflation targets. We're actually starting to hear whispers of accepting 3% instead of the traditional 2% as the new normal. And third, a strategic shift in messaging so the traditional consumer price index, or CPI, simply matters less. By moving the goalposts and riding the wave of cheaper energy, the Fed secures the necessary cover to lower rates while framing the whole thing as a calculated victory.
Section 3. The coming boom and bust. All right, so now that we understand the hidden pressures and the catalysts, we really have to look at what happens next. The source material lays out this chronological timeline, and the very first domino that's going to fall is bank deregulation. Now, I know that sounds like dry political jargon, but it's actually absolutely crucial. It's the easing of strict rules on bank lending reserves. You see, when the Fed cuts rates and banks are simultaneously deregulated, it fundamentally alters the entire financial landscape. It essentially frees up massive, historic amounts of capital that are currently locked away, setting that money up to suddenly flood directly into the market.
Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Wait a minute. If they flood the market with all this newly unleashed lending, won't that just cause massive consumer inflation immediately? It's a great question, and understanding the counterintuitive analysis presented in our source is key here. This new capital doesn't actually trigger an instant spike in the price of milk or gas. Instead, that liquidity flows into financial assets first. It pumps up stocks, it inflates real estate, and it fuels corporate expansion. The inflation happens in the asset markets long before it ever trickles down to everyday consumer goods.
Let's trace exactly how this entire boom and bust cycle plays out. Step 1, the Fed cuts rates to relieve those massive underlying debt pressures we talked about. Step 2, banks deregulate and aggressively start lending out all that newly freed capital. This massive liquidity injection triggers Step 3, a spectacular, short-term economic boom, where markets just soar and honestly, everything feels fantastic. But look closely at the final step. Because this boom is entirely artificial, fueled by cheap debt rather than actual organic economic productivity, it absolutely must result in an inevitable painful bust when the debt cycle turns.
Section 4. Preparing for the shift.
Look, this isn't just some theoretical exercise in macroeconomics. This has profound, real-world implications for all of us. The market is wrong about interest rates. That quote right there is the anchor of this entire analysis. Again, we are not here to tell you what to do with your portfolio. But while the mainstream consensus continues to confidently price in stability and persistently higher rates, recognizing this massive market illusion, the fact that underlying debt is actually forcing a pivot towards a huge boom and bust is the absolutely critical first step to getting your own financial preparation in order.
Which brings us to our final slide and honestly the most important question for you to ponder today. When that artificial, liquidity-fueled boom inevitably becomes a crushing bust, will you be ready? By looking past the daily headlines and truly understanding the hidden pressures in private credit, government debt, and Fed policy, you gain a unique advantage. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the consensus, use the data to guide you, and stay focused out there. See you next time.